The casting process itself was tough for me because I've never been an overly social person. I tend to like my privacy. So the whole movie was a process of getting me out of my comfort zone, but especially the casting part, actually going out and finding actors. We held an open call. About 50 people showed up to it, which blew me away. I mean, some of them came from all over the state. Another 50 people or so tried out by sending us video clips of themselves auditioning from the sides that we had put out. Kyle Cruz Cordova was brought in last minute to play Duvall because our original actor had to drop out for personal reasons. So we had just a couple weeks to recast our captain. Both the captain and the XO are cast deliberately young, as that's the story point. But Kyle, despite that youth, was able to show a kind of world weariness that was appropriate for the character. And Kyle's good at thinking on camera. You can see the gears turning behind Duvall's eyes.
The way that I got into Headspace is I pick phrases. There are very key phrases that I hold on to, and I pick character voices and attitudes and inflection and everything like that. Saint Nishit, I have a very specific inflection on, and it's because that was one of the words that I chose to get into character. There's also hand movements, other things like that. Things that put me out of my own experience and into this person. I do this a lot. Because for the sitting scenes, and it was because like this is more of a show of power because it's steadfast and strong.
The XO, Thomas Hess, was tough to cast because most people I tried in the part seemed too reasonable, where I thought we needed something edgier, more reckless, to show a character more out of his depth and not realizing it. And that's where Andrew Vandegrift came in.
It is in a different realm from what I usually do, because in real life and on stage, I've always had like really big energy and really big movements and sounds and voices. It's cool to have this character, pretty much like my first on-camera character, be something so different, because I figured I'd probably end up like doing something in a comedy position if I ever found myself here.
Barrows I originally envisioned much older, but Brian, when we saw him, he nailed the charm and slightly smarmy arrogance that the character needed. So we aged him down a little bit, because the moment Brian opened his mouth, we were looking at each other going, Barrows, that's Barrows.
You know, Kyle playing that uncertain leader, it then became very easy for me to play the older veteran who was either sometimes frustrated with him or encouraged by him.
Blackwell Hurd is interesting. He had a real presence and poise right from the beginning. This great sense of control.
His face and his height made the angles at which you see him in the finished product almost Spock-like.
So I cast him as the stoic, very professional gunnery officer, Savrin.
I particularly enjoyed the whole sequence where Gary starts to get loud, and I get to start ordering people around Royce do this. I just wanted to say, fire now! As all good sci-fi kids want to say. It's all we do. We sit up in bed and go, fire!
The communications officer was meant to be probably the most reasonable and level-headed of the officers, and Anthony Kelly, along with that great voice of his, he just had this natural calm that I liked. I thought really fit him nicely.
So to me, he's kind of like the gentleman's gentleman. So he was always up straight. So like on set, I would literally put my hands behind my back, try to be that more dignified figure. A thought of mine has always been like, I've always wanted to command like a ship. And I think a cool part of the show is like, I think at one point or another, everybody gets that task.
That was deliberate. I wanted to show the routine on board, including all the officers taking the con in shifts and not just having the captain and maybe the exec occasionally always running things.
Being able to just command a ship is really like powerful feeling.
Art Razzo and Andrew Hook both ended up auditioning using the same piece of script material. Andrew by video, and Art in person at the open call we held.
I remember getting the sides, and we were asked to choose, from a variety and pick our best ones to audition for. So I thought that was kind of cool and interesting, where we might be put as characters based on maybe the sides we chose.
I ended up picking a drunk cop in a church. To this day, it's one of my favorite auditioning times?
You know, I think I picked the same one. Because he's in a confession, right?
That's right.
Yeah, that was the same one. That was the
Check
one
that
that
out.
I did in person. And we don't do the same character.
I saw different qualities in them and thought that they would fit together well in the sort of mentor relationship that they have in the script.
Did you read anything?
I did, yeah. That was a true story. That was
great. That was great.
Yeah.
I first tested Dylan Tompkins as the crew member Abel, but on a whim I then tried him as Royce, and he just plowed through these dense technical speeches the character had with a really good sense of youthful rebellion and carelessness, and so I put him in as Royce. Dalton Woldridge was a really easy choice for Abel. I think we cast a lot of people with great eyes, and Dalton definitely has great eyes, and he nailed the kind of nervousness that the character needed. Dimitri was tough to cast too, much like the XO and Royce. Most of the people who tested were just too broadly comedic. Troy has actually been on several TV shows, and he had a great sense of how to play a bit of a foil for Solace without you disliking him for maybe being a bit of a bully. He was able to find that balance of charm and aggressiveness, I think, instead of, playing him, kind of like a broad buffoon, which is what we were mostly getting. Henry and Charlie Grossen I've known since we were all very young, so I knew I could count on them for Eli and the helmsman, plus a half dozen more people as various crew members and voices, plus the brief appearance of Ashley Reichert as Lydia Arkwright. It's a pretty large cast for a low-budget show like this, but it was important to me to get across a sense of a working ship with a lot of people on board.
The script and the episode as a whole, you do get more of a feel as an ensemble. There's very much a feeling of you get to know everyone in the crew at one point or another. But when you get right down to it, it is obviously focused on the story of Marcus, played by Kyle. And where his story goes is going to shape what the rest of the ensemble cast experience.
Chimera was shot in 17 days. Pretty much all of us had day jobs during that time, so it was all done on weekends. We did 1 month of weekends, took a few weeks off, and then shot for another month of weekends. I'd never made a commercial feature before, and most of us were amateurs in the world of film. A lot of the cast had done a good amount of theater, but only a couple of us had actually done any kind of movie or feature work. Sean Bidwell, I think, was the only person on the crew who had actual Hollywood set experience. He'd been a PA and done location work, data wrangling, editing on real movies. And he found us while we were auditioning actors and offered to come on board. He ended up not only as our production manager, but also as a co-producer. Going into the shoot itself, I only had Sean and a few friends to help out every now and again. I had essentially planned to be like Robert Rodriguez, making El Mariachi, being my own crew, doing everything myself. I learned very quickly just how hard that is, especially with a cast this large, plus effects, plus a super short filming schedule. I don't think I'd realized just how much I'd bitten off to chew until we got on set.
From the first day on set, I could tell that Michael needed a crew and that I was capable of being a crew member. Didn't just have to be an executive producer. I could help out.
Dave DeCenso found us while we were fundraising, while we were running our crowdfunding campaign. He just finished shooting a sci-fi film of his own locally called Singularities, and he offered equipment and support that turned out to be absolutely invaluable. I was going to shoot on just whatever I could get at the time. I was probably going to shoot on a simple, cheap DSLR with a kit lens, but he brought full professional package of equipment that we were able to use. First day of shooting, he brought along his first AD from Singularities, Tanya Stoddard, and she was another invaluable asset to our group.
Tanya is one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And then when it was time to buckle down, if people weren't getting things together, she was one of the harshest taskmasters on set. I just always loved it whenever she cracked the whip. That was just one of my favorite things.
If I'm being honest, it took me a few weekends to really relinquish control and let my crew properly do their jobs. I mean, aside from my co-writer Patrick and Laura producing alongside me, I'd been effectively working alone in my basement for such a long time that it was a real adjustment. I guess that's the nature of micro-budget filmmaking to an extent. I hadn't worked on anyone else's film set before, and you just don't have that set experience until you have it. And really, the whole movie was this way. Laura and I, at least, were learning all this as we went, not just how to produce and direct on set, but all the surrounding parts of casting, prep, and post, not to mention the business aspect.
Michael and I hadn't really professionally worked behind a camera before. I certainly had never done it. And Michael had created some films when he was younger, but not on a professional set.
For me, Chimera was frankly a trial by fire. On top of that, I had some family members who had health issues. I had some health issues too during the shoot. Laura and I were raising 2 children under 6 years old.
The level of anxiety in knowing that all of these people were relying on us to pull this off was huge.
If I hadn't had Dave, Sean, Tanya, and even Olivia Russell and her kids actively working on set with me, helping out, I would have gone insane. I'd be giving this interview in a straitjacket right now.
Sean and Dave and Tanya totally saved our butts in running that film set.
There is a moment that turned out really well. Art and I are looking into a hatch. The camera was shooting up from like it was inside the engine, and Art is right here and I'm like here looking over his shoulder. And I could see in my head how this was going, turned around how this was going to look, and I'm like, dude, this is going to look awesome when we see it.
Enough breadboards in there to make the whole crew sandwiches. Open face.
I thought that was just a really, really interesting and out there line. It really kind of shows some depth to my, character, because it shows his sense of humor, which is clearly goofy.
Dad jokes. I mean, that's what that line was. That's a pure dad joke. One of my favorite parts on set was like some of the action scenes.
I thought the most difficult thing was going to be when the hull breach took place. How am I going to do this when all of the air is getting sucked out the room? How am I going to act like that? That was what I was concerned about. Turned out it was no problem whatsoever, because when you have 2 6-foot fans pointing at you and you're trying to scream right into them, it really does feel like all the air is being sucked out of the room. Your eyes are streaming and you can't breathe.
And fans. All the way up, Jane. All right. And action!
So we had a fan blowing, and then I just remember I had to continually throw myself down on that pad time and time again. And Michael, the director, kept, "Are you all right? Are you all right? Can we do another one?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we can do another one, for sure." Like maybe it looked worse, like it was painful, and it wasn't. Although I did have to get my spine readjusted. That's a joke. There's my dad joke. All right.
Gravity tends to work in space by proxy. Something is pulling you, or you are anchored to something. So if something shifts violently, everything else moves, you don't. So that involved all of us hurling ourselves backwards in a particular direction.
Clinton, I think what I would want is for you to hold on kind of with both hands here, like this, pull yourself back. Well, you fling out and you grab at the table and at your seat.
And so when we were doing the stunt scene of, people fly backwards and go over here, we were discussing, okay, so the ship moves laterally. Why don't we just have you two double in, kick your hips out so you go flat against the table as if the table has punched you. And then, Brian, you and me, we're going this way, like this. So I had a ball solving problems for that on set.
Whoa! I'm trying here, all right?
Anything physical I get to do is just right on the money for me. Set me on fire, I'm in the engine room, do it, I'm down. We're good. I should have been a stunt man.
We shot at Water Tower Place in Pueblo. It's this huge 100-year-old meatpacking plant on Santa Fe Avenue.
Water Tower Place is the old Knuckles meatpacking plant. There used to be, I think it was 2,000 or 3,000 head of cattle come through that place every day. It was a great place for production of meat for the nation.
It's just gigantic. It's 4 floors tall. It's all made of brick.
So my eyes are always out looking at opportunities. And that's also the way that Water Tower Place is actually evolving as a vertical urban village. So all of the people that come and are going to be coming are kind of part of this very organic, kind of synergistic, kind of creative, innovative space where ideas and things come to fruition.
I met Gregory at the Arts Alliance networking event, and he ended up being one of the creative directors for Water Tower Place.
You know, I have to be honest, though, when I first pulled up to this building, I'm like, man, we're filming in an abandoned slaughterhouse. That's what I thought it was at the very beginning. I was walking into the building like half scared and like halfway really intrigued at the same time.
Water Tower Place, it was easily one of the most unique places I've ever worked with. And I've actually been there more than once because I've done the haunted house there. And then we got to take a tour for like all of the building. I never got to go into the refurbished bit, but I got to go into the bit where like, oh, this was part for the slaughtering. This was the part for like where everybody got to take showers. And like seeing all that, it was creepy and eerie, and I love all of that. And then seeing the refurbished bit, it was just a complete 180.
I got involved about 4 years ago. Ryan McWilliams had just purchased Water Tower Place and was going to be creating it into kind of a community-based destination for arts and engineering and everything in between. I approached him to put my art gallery in that particular building, which is 250,000 square feet. It's actually the largest adaptive reuse of a historic property in Colorado, probably one of the largest in the country.
Growing up in Pueblo and driving by it, I always wanted to go in. And I never knew they were trying to renovate it, so I was always thinking about hopping a fence and going in there and checking it out. And then the fact that we got to shoot there, I was like, okay, I get to check out some of it. And then where we ended up shooting was actually pretty nice, because I always wanted to go in there anyway, and I didn't have to do it illegal now.
Yeah.
The space we used was actually a renovated conference room. So during the week, they'd be hosting meetings and high school graduations, all kinds of things.
Special events and meetings and conferences in this same really wonderful room, but also making it work so that there were large enough blocks so that filming could take place. So it really worked out fine. And for us, it was really committing. And in committing, we wanted to make sure that the project did see its completion. We wouldn't have gotten involved if we didn't believe in the project in the beginning.
The big challenge was there were all these windows that had to be blacked out with tablecloths and garbage bags and stuff. There were tons of other places we could have shot inside of Water Tower Place. It's huge, but most of it was either in constant use by other entities or else it was very raw, untouched literally in decades in places. The Alpha Beta room, as it was called, was clean. It had space for us to lay out lunch and even a bathroom where the actors could change. The trade-off to blacking out all those windows and lugging equipment in and out up the stairs every weekend was that we had this very comfortable space to shoot in, which helped a lot, I think.
Sometimes there'd be a car from the 1920s that's doing another filming in the front lot, and all of a sudden they're upstairs filming, and then there's a train that goes by.
Motorcycles.
Careful.
Cut.
Pueblo's known for motorcycles and muscle cars.
You know, usually on set you'll hear pause for aircraft, but ours was all pause for motorcycle.
There was the train. There were the motorcycles going by. There was the helicopter.
They would essentially pull up beside the building and idle there, and they would sometimes sit there for 20 minutes just idling. It's just this low-level, low-frequency hum. And that's just no good for sound, you know?
And the funny thing about those moments is that everyone who's on that set will always treasure those moments. It's something, it's a shared experience that we all have, that you get in this really intense emotional moment and things are happening, and then all of a sudden that, you know, the train comes by.
Cut. Sorry.
It wasn't as bad as it could have been, actually. It's just one of those, it happened again kind of things.
I just remember walking in each and every time, and it was always a different situation, which is the nature of filmmaking.
Every time I walked in, I found Andrew Vandergriff sleeping in a different place. He was a king of the power nap.
And the great food. I mean, my gosh, all the homemade food was fantastic.
There was always some wrinkle or another. More than once, we had to rearrange whole chunks of the shooting schedule on the day of shooting a couple of times.
On set, Michael is extremely focused. If there's a plan B, he knows that and can execute the plan B.
When our intention of making an ongoing online show clearly became impossible, we ended up shifting the entire approach of things in post-production, from TV pilot mode to feature film mode. We're going to make a trilogy of feature films. I'm really proud of our little homegrown family-made movie. Looking at it after the fact, it's plainly my first commercial feature, and I can see all the places where, oh, I could have done better there, I really should have done this way, and oh, that would have elevated everything else. But I'm proud of it. This started as essentially a garage project, and while it grew to be a bit more than that, I think we retained that spirit all the way through. And I think it's prepared all of us to push to greater heights on the next one, to look honestly at the things we did right and the things that we could or should have done better, and to learn from all those things. It's been an amazing, tough, and sometimes heartbreaking process, but I'll always be grateful to the cast and crew for all coming together, working together with very, very little to try and make something that at times seemed impossible.